What a huge day in US soccer. After months and months and months of waiting, after postponing the tournament, we finally have in our hands an official Olympic roster for the Wait, this is still just a preliminary roster? And some of the names on the roster aren't actually going to be on the team, but they could be in the future, and we just don't. Okay, guys, we have an official preliminary roster for an upcoming Olympic qualifying camp. This is still very exciting. We've got a whole lot to unpack. There's a ton of shenanigans going on. Let's get right into it. Hi, my name is Sam. Welcome to the Yank Report, the show we talk about US men's soccer. And if you're into that kind of thing, please hit the subscribe button. And, if you like this video, if you like it so far, hit that like button. It helps out the channel a lot. I hear every time you hit the like button, US Soccer releases another Olympic qualifying roster. So US Soccer has released a 31-player roster ahead of the upcoming camp for the Olympic qualifying team. Now, as is tradition, the bigger story is the players who were not going to be on that roster. And specifically, in this case, the players who were on the roster but aren't going to be a part of the team. Atlanta United continues its ongoing feud with US Soccer as we have three Atlanta United players, Brooks Lennon, George Bello, and Miles Robinson, who were initially part of the roster, but then Atlanta United at the last minute said, you know what, wait, we don't want these players going to camp. Apparently there's concern from Atlanta United that if they release these players, they won't be back in time for CONCACAF Champions League. They won't have enough time to quarantine. If this Jason Kreis seems a little bit frustrated. Now, they asked Jason Kreis if these players might potentially be a part of future Olympic qualifying teams, and he seemed like he didn't know that either. So, way to go, Atlanta United. This is very important because Miles Robinson was expected to be the starting center back on this team. Without Miles Robinson, there's a lot of more uncertainty on the defense. Speaking of the defense, we have George Bello. George Bello is going to be missing out on another opportunity to compete with Sam Vines for the left back depth chart. Sam Vines appears to be ahead of him on that depth chart right now, but George Bello is the player with the much higher ceiling that everyone's excited about. This was going to be an opportunity for him to compete with head-to-head with Vines, but now that opportunity's gone. Some other notable names that we were hoping would be a part of this roster but are not are going to be Conrad De La Fuente of Barcelona, Owen Otasowie of Wolves, and Efraim Alvarez of LA Galaxy. Now, in Efra's case, he was named to both the U.S. men's national team Olympic roster and the Mexican Olympic roster. If Efra wanted to join the U.S. men's national team camp, he would have to file a one-time switch. He's not ready to do that yet, so he opted just to stay out of the camp. As far as Conrad and Otasowie, I'm not sure what the situation is there, whether they were offered positions or whether their teams just denied the release. So I don't know. We might find out about that later. Now, who is actually on this list? Let's get into that right now, starting with the goalkeepers. For goalkeepers, we have Matthew Freese of the Philadelphia Union, Jonathan Klinsmann of the LA Galaxy, JT Marcinkowski of the San Jose Earthquakes, and David Ochoa of Real Salt Lake. This goalkeeper list has a few veteran players, some guys who have gotten MLS caps, but nobody who's like a lockdown starter in MLS. JT Marcinkowski at 23 years old is thought to be the starter of this bunch. David Ochoa is the exciting player at 20 years old that everybody is waiting to see what he does in MLS, if he ever lives up to the tremendous hype. Of course, he's had a bunch of injury issues in the past, so we'll see how that battle plays out in camp. Moving on to the defenders. Julian Araujo, Marco Farfan, Justin Glad, Aaron Herrera, Henry Kessler, Mauricio Pineda, Austin Trusty, and Sam Vines. Now, a lot of the names on this list were called into the last round of friendlies, so we have players like Julian Araujo, Sam Vines, Aaron Herrera, who will be competing for those positions. Sam Vines is likely going to be the left back in this camp. What happens with Julian Araujo and Aaron Herrera will be an interesting battle. Those are two players that I do like watching, so I want to see who wins that battle at that position. Now, for the center back position, with Miles Robinson out of the picture, it's going to be really interesting. The early indication is that Justin Glad and Mauricio Pineda are the front runners for those two center back positions, but we'll see what happens as the tournament progresses. Moving on to the midfield, where we do have a little bit more sauce going on. Frankie Amaya, Cole Bassett, Johnny Cardoso, Hassani Dotson, Andres Perea, Tanner Tessman, Eric Williamson, and Jackson Ewell. Now, two names that are going to jump right off the page for a lot of U.S. men's national team fans are going to be Tanner Tessman and Cole Bassett. These are two 19-year-olds that were called into the last U.S. men's national team camp. I believe Bassett had to withdraw for some reason, but Tanner Tessman did get on the field and received a cap. Andres Perea is a dual international. He is a Colombiano, but he made the switch to the U.S. men's national team. I'm excited about Andres Perea. I think that he could potentially be a player we see on the senior squad, so I'm really interested to see how he shakes out in this particular camp. Now, the main event in this midfield, the most interesting player battle in this entire roster, is going to come down to Johnny Cardoso and Jackson Ewell. These are two players that are fighting over that backup defensive midfielder position behind Tyler Adams. I'm very interested to see how Cardoso stacks up against Ewell. We've seen a lot of fun highlights out of Brazil for Johnny Cardoso, but a lot of us have not gotten a ton of time to see him play. Jackson Ewell, on the other hand, we've seen him play pretty well for the U.S. men's national team. He was expected to have a big year last year in MLS. Didn't really happen, so we'll see how that plays out. Could this be an opportunity for Johnny Cardoso to pull ahead of Jackson Ewell and solidify himself as that backup on the U.S. men's national team? I'm very excited to see what happens in this particular player battle. Now let's move on to the forwards. We got Jesus Ferreira, Jonathan Lewis, Uli Yanez, Benji Michel, Jordi Mihailovic, Ricardo Pepi, Sebastian Saucedo, and Sebastian Soto. Now, the forward list is really interesting because you have some older players who are 23, 24 years old, and you also have some younger players who are teenagers to 20-year-olds. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, whether Jason Kreis wants to go with an experienced player like Sebastian Saucedo, who's playing in Liga MX, who's actually 24 years old, but because of the whole, virus thing, he gets to play in this U23 camp. Or you go with a Uli Yanez, who's a much younger player who hasn't had as much professional playing time as Saucedo, but has a much higher upside. You also have players like Jonathan Lewis and Jordi Mihailovic, who at 23 and 22 years old, which might not be very old in world soccer, but for the U.S. men's national team senior roster, they're competing against guys who are 18 and 20 years old. Christian Pulisic is 22, so it's kind of put up or shut up time for them. And then, as always, it wouldn't be a U.S. men's national team roster without questions at the striker position. You got some interesting prospects here. You got Jesus Ferreira, who has showed really well in Greg Berhalter's system, is a player that people are excited about, but does not play that same position for his club team at FC Dallas. Did not have a great year at FC Dallas. Speaking of FC Dallas, you got Ricardo Pepi, who is just a player that we've been hearing so much about since he was young, coming up in that FC Dallas system. Just spent some time at Bayern Munich training. He's 18 years old. Everybody's expecting this to be the season where he really steps up. Will this Olympic qualifying campaign be his time to show up and say, I could be a player for the future for this national team? And then you have Sebastian Soto, who had a big U20 World Cup, but has really had a tough club career since then. Now he is at Norwich, but apparently Norwich does not have him in the plans because they sent him to this Olympic qualifying roster. So a lot of question marks about Sebastian Soto. So that's it for the roster. This roster will be cut down from the 31 names minus the 3 Atlanta United names to 20 names, and that 20 names will compete in the upcoming games at the end of the camp. So there's going to be a lot of interesting player position battles. Like I said, the ones that I'm really focused on right now are Julian Araujo versus Aaron Herrera at right back, Jackson Ewell versus Johnny Cardoso for defensive midfielder. That's going to be really fun. Cole Bassett, Tanner Tessman, and Andres Perea are going to be really fun. I want to see which one of them shows up and pulls ahead in that race. And then the 3 strikers, Jesus Ferreira, Sebastian Soto, and Ricardo Pepi. Will the youth prevail? Will it be Jesus Ferreira, who's had experience with the senior team? Will it be Sebastian Soto, who's had experience with the senior team, who has been all around the world at this point? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. So I'm curious what your reaction to this roster is. I know that we were expecting a lot of fun players like Conrad De La Fuente and Odin Owasawi, and it didn't end up like that. I know we wanted George Bello to see what he could do, and that didn't end up. So a lot of the sizzle has been removed from this roster, but it's still a youth international roster. It's still something to talk about. It's still opportunity to see some really interesting position battles for the US men's senior team. So what are your reactions? What are you looking forward to? Who's the biggest snub? Who do you think is going to really start here and really grow from this roster? Let me know. Thank you for tuning in. If you are still watching this video, please hit that subscribe button. You made it this far, you might as well stick with me for good. Please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. My name is Sam, and this is the Anchor Report.